Before we begin writing the equations for all of these different representations, I want to remind you that all of our equations are going to be written in the form of y equals mx plus b. And when we do that, the m represents the slope and the b represents the y-intercept. These are the only two pieces of information you need to write your equation, because the y and the x, these are the coordinates for every point on that line. All of the points on the line will work with the equation when you have the slope and the y-intercept. So that's what we're starting with. This is what we're looking for when we say to write an equation in the slope-intercept form. It's always going to start with y equals, the slope will be next, and then the variable x, and then you'll have your y-intercept at the end. Now, it's only going to be plus b if your y-intercept is positive, and it'll be minus b if it's negative. And your y-intercept is just where on the line, where on this line, the y axis, where does the line cross? So for example, if this is your line, then your y-intercept is here. Oops, using the wrong pen. This would be your y-intercept, because this is your y-axis, and this is where it crosses the y-axis, so it's called your y-intercept. It's where x is 0. So in this case, we could say it's a 2. And let's say that this had a slope of, had a slope of 3. If your slope is 3 and your y-intercept is 2, because this is where x is 0, then your equation would be y equals 3x plus 2. Do you see? All I needed was to find my slope, and it goes next to the x, find the y-intercept, and it goes at the end. It's a positive 2. That's why it's plus 2. So that's what we're doing. For each one of these, we have to figure out the slope, and we have to figure out the y-intercept. Sometimes they'll give it to us, sometimes we have to work for it. All right, let's begin. In the first example, they're giving you the slope, and they're giving you the y-intercept. The slope is 4, so I know in my equation, it's always going to start with y equals. I need to know the slope. There's my variable, and then I need my y-intercept. Since the slope is 4, the number 4 goes here. My y-intercept is negative 4, and it goes at the end. So my equation is y equals 4x minus 4. That's it. For the second one, we're going to do the same thing. Y equals the slope times x plus or minus the y-intercept. The slope is negative 3/4, so that goes here. The y-intercept is negative 2, because that's where x is 0, and that goes here. Notice that that negative 2 makes that minus 2, because the negative sign also means subtraction. And there you have the first two are done. These are the easiest because they're giving you those two pieces of information that we need. We needed the slope, and they give it to us, and we needed the y-intercept. Notice there's no parentheses here. There's only one equal sign, and it's always going to follow y equals mx plus b. In these two examples, they're giving you the slope, but not the y-intercept, so we have to do the work to find the y-intercept. If you recall from class, I said there's 3 steps. First, you have to find the slope, then you have to find the y-intercept, and lastly, of course, you just write the equation. These are your 3 steps. Step 1 is done for us. We already know the slope is negative 2. So slope is negative 2. We also have a point. They always give you the point in the order of x and y. So I know that my x is 3 and my y is negative 2, right? Because that came from here. What we're going to do to find the y-intercept is use the equation y equals mx plus b, and we're going to substitute these 3 numbers for what we already know in the equation. And the only thing we don't know is the y-intercept. So we're going to use the 3 pieces of information they gave us to find the y-intercept. So instead of y, we have negative 2. Let me use a different color. So instead of y, we have negative 2 equals. Instead of m, we use our slope of negative 2. Right? There's the y, there's the m, times. Notice I'm going to use parentheses to show multiplication because I don't want to use the x. It gets a little confusing. The x is 3, and then plus b. And this is what we're trying to find out, is the b, that's the y-intercept. From here, we have to multiply. Let me bring that down because that doesn't change. Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. Still don't know what b is. To figure out b, I'm going to use my inverse operation. I'm going to use the opposite because I need this to add up to 0. But since it's an equation, whatever you do to the one side, you have to do to the other. So if I'm going to add 6 on the right, I have to add 6 on the left also. That makes 0, so all I have is b, which is good news because that's what my goal was to get the b by itself. And negative 2 plus 6 is 4. And now I have a y-intercept. I have a slope. I have a y-intercept. Now I can write my equation. Y equals the slope times x, and then your y-intercept. So let's see. Here's my slope. So it's going to go here. That's negative 2. So negative 2x. And then here's my y-intercept. That goes at the end. It's positive. So it's going to be plus 4. And there's your equation. We're going to do the same thing with the other side. Let me erase. Okay, for this one, we have our slope, which is negative 1. And then here's our x and our y. So let's start substituting. Instead of y, we have, what do we have? We have 3. Instead of m, I have negative 1, because that's the slope. This is the m. Instead of x, we're going to multiply by negative 2, because that's what the x is. And again, I'm going to use my parentheses so I don't get confused. Multiply. Negative 1 times negative 2 is positive 2. So now I have 3 equals 2 plus b. Subtract 2 from both sides. Remember, you need this to equal 0. And do the same thing on both sides. So that cancels out. 3 minus 2 is 1. There's your y-intercept. So this time, it's still y equals something x, and then your y-intercept. So I need the slope goes here. The y-intercept goes there. I already have the slope. It's negative 1. And my y-intercept we just figured out is positive 1. And there's your equation. Y equals negative x, or negative 1x, plus 1. Ta-da! Okay, moving on. So you can see these are getting progressively harder because now they don't give you anything. They don't give you a slope or a y-intercept. So when we're finding the slope from 2 points, this is where we have to use our slope formula. y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. And as I've said in class, it's best to label your points. Coordinates are always in the order of x and y. And since this is point number 1, this gets to be x1 and y1. And this is our second point, so this is x2 and y2. Now, it's important when you're using the slope formula to make sure you're using the right numbers in the right order. So y2 is negative 3. See how that's y2? And that's negative 3. That's going to go first. And we're going to subtract the y1, which is 4. So in my numerator, I have negative 3 minus 4 divided by x2 x2 minus x1. So negative 2 minus 5. It has to be in the right order. So this is negative 2 minus 5. Now, if you're not good with your integer math, I encourage you to check with your calculator or with your computer. You have a calculator on there. So negative 3 minus 4 is actually negative 7. And negative 2 minus 5 is also negative 7. And any number divided by itself is 1. So that's your slope. Now, we have the slope. We still need to figure out our y-intercept. This is step 2. That's why I was saying this is probably the hardest type because they don't give you any information. You have to figure out the slope and the y-intercept. So we know slope is 1. Let's do the y-intercept. We're going to use the equation y equals mx plus b and substitute. We already know the slope is 1. But what about the x and the y? Well, what's cool is you can use either point. You can use the first point or you can use the second point. What you can't do is you can't use the x from one and then the y from the other, because that's a totally different point. That's not on the same line. I'm going to use the first point because I like to avoid negatives if I can. So here the x is 5 and the y is 4. So under the y, I have 4, and where the x is, I have 5. I don't know why I changed colors. Doesn't matter. Multiply. Bring down everything else. And because that's a positive 5, I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. Remember, this needs to equal 0, because we want that to cancel out because we're trying to isolate the variable b. And 4 minus 5 is negative 1. And now we have both pieces of information. We have a slope and a y-intercept. So my equation is y equals the slope times x, and then you have your y-intercept at the end. My slope is 1, so that's 1x, and my y-intercept is negative 1, so that becomes minus 1. That's your equation. Y equals 1x minus 1. Let's try the second one. Okay, this one's exactly the same. I'm going to first label my points. This is my first point, so this is x1, y1. This is my second point, x2, y2. So for my slope, I need to be careful. y2 minus y1 in this case is going to be 2 minus 0. And x2 minus x1 is going to be 5 minus negative 3. 2 minus 0 is 2. 5 minus negative 3. Remember I keep telling you in class, when you have those two negatives next to each other, they cancel each other out and it becomes addition. 5 plus 3 is 8. And 2/8 is the same as 1/4. Okay, so there's your slope. Slope is 1/4. That's going to be easy. All right, now we get to pick which point we want to use. It doesn't matter which one we use, but I'm going to use the second one because I want to avoid that negative. So this is where we substitute. Instead of the y, I'm going to use 2. You see where that's coming from? This is my x, this is my y. I'm using the y to substitute. Next I'm going to use the slope. That's here. So that gives me equals 1/4 times x. Here's the x. That's a 5. Plus b. Okay, from here we multiply. So now I get 2 equals 1/4 times 5. Well, that's really 5 over 1. We multiply across. 1 times 5 is 5. 4 times 1 is 4. Plus b. If I'd realized there was a fraction, I probably wouldn't have assigned this one. My apologies. But regardless, you're in 8th grade. You can do fractions. You want to subtract. Since the first fraction was positive, we want to do a negative, so they'll cancel out. We have to subtract 5/4 from 2. So we're going to change 2 to make it a denominator of 4, because I need like terms in order to subtract. So 2, let's see, if I multiply that by 4, I get 4, and 2 times 4 is 8. So 8/4 is the same as 2, okay? So now I have 8/4 minus 5/4. Oops, that's a 4. Well, 8 minus 5 is 3, and the denominator stays the same. So on this side, I have 3/4 is equal to b. That seemed a little painful, didn't it? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to give you a fraction. Anyway, we have our slope is 1/4, and now we know the b is 3/4. Now we can write the equation. It's always y equals the slope times x, and then your y-intercept. Our slope is 1/4, so y equals 1/4 x plus 3/4. And that's how you do the second one. All right, finding slope from a graph. So they do give you the coordinates. So you could use the slope formula. You could do that. So either way, we need to find the slope first, and then we're going to find the y-intercept. But I like to use the graph to figure these things out. Let's see, will it let me? Of course not. So in order to find our slope, we can draw our slope triangle. So I'm going to draw straight down and straight over, and let's count our units. So this is 1, 2, 3. Because remember, slope on a graph is rise over run. So in this case, the rise we just saw is 3. And the run This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yay for another fraction. Sorry about that. Yeah. Anyway, and because the line is going down, it means it's negative. All right. It looks, we can't really tell what the y-intercept is there, can we? It looks like it's going through the origin, but I bet it's not. That would be too easy. So what are we going to do? We're going to use our equation y equals mx plus b, and we're going to substitute all of the things that we can find. So we know the slope is negative 3/5. So that's going to go there. And let's use one of the points. Let's see. Let's use the first one. It's negative 2, 1. It's kind of hard to read it, but that's the point they give us, negative 2, 1. So that's the x and the y. So instead of y, we have 1, and instead of x, we have negative 2 plus b. See, it's not going to be 0, 0. It looks like it could be, but it's not. It's off a little bit. Let's see exactly where it is, though. So we need to multiply. Negative 3 times negative 2 is 6. I'm going to leave that as an improper fraction for the moment. Just now we subtract. Remember, we need this to equal 0, so we use the opposite. Whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. And in order to subtract, I need to have like terms. So let me take this problem. I'm going to move it over here for a second. Instead of 1, I'm going to make that 5/5. Because that's the same as 1. Remember, any number divided by itself is 1. So I changed the 1 into 5/5 because I need to subtract 6/5. And 5 minus 6 is negative 1, and you keep the denominator the same. Which means that negative 1/5 is equal to b. Remember, that canceled out. There we have it. We're ready to write our answer. We have our slope. We have our y-intercept. Here we go. Y equals the slope times x, and then your y-intercept. Your slope goes here. So y equals negative 3/5 x minus 1/5, because that's a negative. There'd you go. All right, let's do the next one. All right, let's make our slope triangle so we can find the slope. Let's see, let's do our rise. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So our rise is 7. And what's the run? 1, 2, 3. The rise is 7, or I'm sorry, your rise over run. Your run is 3, so your slope is 7/3. I know, all the fractions. Can we find the y-intercept easily? Yeah, you can't really tell, can you? Yeah. So we're going to have to do, on step 2, we're going to use our equation, y equals mx plus b, and we're going to substitute all the things that we know. We just figured out the slope is 7/3, so that's going to go there. And then we can pick either one of our points. Let's use the point 1, 4. That's this one here. That's our x, and that's our y. So where y is, we put 4, and where the x is, we're going to put 1. Okay, I think we're getting the hang of this now. 4 equals 7/3, because 1 times 7/3, of course, is 7/3. We're going to subtract 7/3. Since this is positive, remember you want to do the opposite so that they cancel out, because I want b over here. Let's see, 4 minus 7/3. I'm going to move it over here. In order to make this possible, I have to have a common denominator. So I'm going to change the 4 to 12/3, because 12 divided by 3 is 4, right? So 4 is the same as 12/3. I changed it so that I can subtract 7/3. Remember, with subtraction, when you subtract fractions, you have to have a common denominator. If that stays the same, and 12 minus 7 is 5. And now we have a y-intercept of 5/3. Ta-da! We have the two things we need. We have a slope, we have a y-intercept. So we can write the equation. Y equals the slope times x and your y-intercept. Your slope is 7/3, so that goes here. Y equals 7/3 x plus 5/3, because 5/3 was positive. And there you go. I think we have 2 left. We're almost done. -2. All right, the last 2. We still have to find the slope. We still have to find a y-intercept. Now, when we're looking at slope from a table, we use change in y, or delta y over delta x, and delta means change. So let's take a look and see if we can figure out how the y is changing. And you can pick any of these. I don't like to look at the negatives. They make me a little nervous, so I'm going to go here. To go from 9 to 5, it got smaller. So it's negative, and it got smaller by 4. And that happens every time, does it? No, it doesn't happen every time. So you have to be careful which two you're picking. Okay, because I have to do the same ones on the left. So let's see. So for the change in y, I have negative 4. And the change in x from 3 to 1, that got smaller by 2. And negative 4 divided by negative 2 is positive 2. Just for the sake of argument, let's take a look. If I chose 5 and 3, 5 got smaller by 2, so I don't know what happened. So that got smaller from 1 to 0 gets smaller by 1, which is going to give you negative 2 over negative 1, which still gives you 2. So you just have to be careful which 2 points you're using. Okay? They're always going to give you the same slope because you can find slope using any of the points on that line. All right, moving on. We know the slope. It's 2. Now we have to find the y-intercept. Luckily, they give it to you in the table because remember, your y-intercept is where x is 0. And I can tell by looking at my table, it's right here. Where x is 0, y is 3. So that means our y-intercept is 3. All right, now we can write our equation. We have, I'm trying to use all the colors. Here's our slope, and here's our y-intercept. So y equals slope times x, and then your y-intercept. Your slope is 2, and your y-intercept is a positive 3. And there's your equation. Y equals 2x plus 3. Now, for the other one, let's see. Let me erase. Hold on. We're going to do the same thing. We have to find the change in y over change in x. Doesn't matter which 2 points we use. Let's see. Look, I like this one. Looks pretty easy. So to go from 12 to 0, it went smaller by 12. So that's negative 12. So that's my change in y. Divided by the change in x. I have to go with the same matching points. So from negative 2 to 0, it got bigger by 2. And negative 12 divided by 2 is negative 6. Okay? It could have been any 2 points. That just seemed like the easiest. If I went this way, let's see, that got smaller by 18, and this got bigger by 3, and negative 18 divided by 3 is also negative 6. So I'm very confident in telling you the slope is negative 6. For our y-intercept, again, they're really just giving us the y-intercept. Remember, it's where x is 0, and in this case, y is also 0. How weird is that? So our y-intercept is 0. And we're ready to write our equation. We have the slope, we have a y-intercept. Our equation is y equals slope times x, and then your y-intercept. So in this case, y equals negative 6x plus 0. But because plus 0 doesn't change anything, we can just write our equation as y equals negative 6x. And we'll know it's proportional. That's it. That's all 10. I hope that helped. I hope I didn't go too fast. If you have any questions, ask me in class.